payment, which ultimately saw about 74% of people refuse to pay, and huge levels of grassroots community organisation across the country, including stopping the imposition of water meters. I remember I spent a lot of time in kind of the aftermath of that movement. You had the establishment of the Oireachtas Committee on the future funding of water charges, and I spent a lot of time in LH 2000 over there, involved in the discussions about, okay, how would they eventually get rid of the water charges. And at the time we warned and we opposed the legislation that stitched into getting rid of the water charges was a backdoor for the future reintroduction of water charges. And that backdoor takes the form of these so-called excessive usage charges, which every household gets 1.7 times average household usage, and then you get, that's up to 4-person households, and then if you're a 5-person household you get an extra allowance, a 6-person household you get an extra allowance on top of that, and so on. We warned at the time that that would be a backdoor to the future reintroduction of water charges, because in the legislation it's explicit that the Minister has the right, by ministerial order, without coming back to the Dáil, to reduce that 1.7 figure. The figure can be varied downwards only. So what starts as 1.7 can become 1.6, 1.5, and then 1, and then become less than 1, and you're into a scenario of, you know, the majority of people in the country facing water charges, and then what flows from that is privatisation. That was originally meant to be implemented by 2020 at the latest, and then it just didn't. It didn't happen, and I think it didn't happen for 2 reasons. One, because it was politically toxic for the government to go ahead, but secondly, because it was technically extremely difficult. I mean, there's a major technical impediment that is still in place, which is that then about 40% of households were not metered. Now that's probably down to about 35% of households not metered, because all new builds are being metered, but no old builds are being metered. There's no ongoing metering programme. So still more than 1 in 3 households do not have water meters, and without water meters there's no mechanism to apply these excessive usage charges. There was obviously no mention of water charges in the course of the general election campaign. There was no mention of excessive usage charges in the election manifestos of Fianna Fáil or of Fine Gael. There's no mention of it in the programme for government. And then this morning we see on the front page of the Irish Independent that in a briefing to the new Minister for Housing, which would include responsibility for water charges, that this is a high priority to introduce excessive usage charges. We want to say very, very clearly to the government that if they proceed with this, they will face massive opposition. That opposition will not just be in the Dáil, where they have a majority, but it will be, like we saw 10 years ago, on the streets in massive numbers, in communities, resisting water meters, and we will make it impossible for them to impose these excessive usage charges. So we are warning the government to step back from this. Obviously we've heard kind of different soundings throughout the course of the day, in the sense that initially you have this briefing saying it's a high level priority, then it seemed there's a report that kind of confirmed it was a high level priority, and now we have a statement saying that, kind of implying that the Minister's not really interested in pursuing this. We need to have clarity from the government about, are they going to go for this or not, and if they're not, can they just promise that this is off the table? We should actually change the legislation so they don't do it. And again, just to restate, the reason that we are against this is because this is simply a method to bring water charges in by the back door. It discriminates against 4-person households in particular. So a 4-person household made up of people who use on average 20% more than the average person will face charges under this regime, because the 1.7 is calculated on a total. So, and then if you're a 1-person household, you know, you're very unlikely to go over the limit. 2-person household, but you're talking about a couple with 2 young kids putting on the washing machine twice a day. I understand the exponential increase in washing machine usage. They likely would face charges under the regime that's currently happening. That's absolutely unjust. That's before they reduce the 1.7, which is what would come down the line. The second thing to point out that has changed, and again makes us very, very suspicious, is that the last government had a political commitment to have a referendum to enshrine Irish water in public ownership. They said they had some problems with the details of the wording of Joan Collins's referendum bill, but they said they were committed to that principle. If you remember, like, that was one of the concessions they gave quite early in the water charges campaign, because we were saying this is about privatisation. For them to try and take that off the table, they said, we'll give you a referendum so water charges is in public ownership. That is not in this programme for government, so they're not making that commitment anymore. So now, from our perspective, they've dropped the commitment to say water will remain in public ownership. They're now saying it's a high-level priority, or internally it's a high-level priority, to introduce these excessive usage charges. And to us, this, adds up to quite a worrying agenda of the government to return to what is their, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are in favour of water charges. I don't believe they've changed their mind on those fronts. I think they're ultimately in favour of water privatisation, and that they may well attempt to go back in that direction. But, like I say, I think they'll be making a major political mistake if they do so. We'll face huge opposition, and I think we will be defeated all over again. I mean, at a bottom kind of technological level, the metering issue is a huge problem for them. If they impose charges on 2/3 of the population, but not 1/3, there's an inherent inequity that will cause a major political problem for the government. It's the areas that were most strongly opposed to water charges that stopped water meters going in. So the idea that the other 2/3 will be just okay with it. Or if they actually try to impose water charges, well, then they'll be faced with, revolt in working class communities, where you'll see water meters being blocked from being installed. And sorry, the final point I'd make is just, I don't buy at all that this has anything to do with tackling leaks or excessive usage or whatever. It doesn't make sense in its own terms, right? The best way to tackle leaks is to invest in dealing with the pipe infrastructure, and that is working. So if you go back to from 2018 to now, the level of leakage in the system has gone from about 48% to about 38%, and Irish Water claims to be on positive trajectory to hitting 25% by 2030. There is investment happening in the system. It's having an impact. Like, that's where we should invest money, in fixing leaks, be they on personal property or public property. That's what we should continue to do. It clearly doesn't make sense to spend 300 million euros to give that out to a private contractor to install water meters in all the homes that have not had water meter installed, as a way of dealing with this issue of leaks. We know that we can identify leaks without having individual metering. You can identify it through district metering and then kind of zoning in about where the leaks are taking place, but you can't impose charges in that way. So it doesn't make sense. This is not about excessive usage, and they should actually focus on investing in infrastructure in Irish Water.
You seem pretty convinced. How can you be so sure that this would be as big a political issue today as it was back then? Because the water charges were essentially like the straw that broke the camel's back at the moment during the recession era.
Yeah, definitely.
If we're rolling money now, we might be like, yeah, actually maybe we should be paying for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. Like, it's true, the water charges was never just about the water charges. It was about accumulated discontent over the bank bailouts, over years and years of austerity, and then this became the lightning rod. But I think the fact that we had that movement means it's a reference point for people, for huge numbers of people. That was something that a movement that they participated in one way or another. Like, most households in the state participated in that movement, whether not by not paying or signing a petition or going to protest. And I think that established in broad public opinion that water charges are bad, they're linked to a process of commodification and privatisation, and we shouldn't go down that road. I presume it's quite possible that papers will poll on the issue of water charges over the next couple of weeks, given it's now in the news, and I'd be very confident that a big majority will be opposed to it. So I think there's just a positive historical memory that isn't that long ago of people fighting successfully against this, and I think if the government goes there, that will be reactivated very, very quickly. I mean, I'm already inundated by people saying, Jesus, Paul, we have to get back out in the streets again, no way can we allow this to go through. I think people got it, and people can see, for example, what continues to happen in terms of our bin services, where, like, it's the exact same process. You have charges, then you have privatisation, and it's kind of universally acknowledged that it's a disaster from the point of view of the environment, from the point of view of households, from the point of view of workers, and people can see exactly the same thing would happen in terms of Irish Water.
The Taoiseach Thomas have spoken a lot about the need to invest significantly in water infrastructure over the last few months, to wastewater, drinking water, to connect up to housing developments across the country. Do you think that's sort of a signal that they're looking into the idea of privatisation of the water system?
I'd certainly say it's possible. I mean, they always tried to hide behind this argument of investment in the water infrastructure 10 years ago. I would point out that there's very important facts here. I was on the radio John Fitzgerald this morning, and he was trying to imply that there was less investment in the water infrastructure than there would have been as a consequence of not having water charges. Like, that's just not factually true. You can go back and look at the capital plan that Irish Water brought forward when they were still planning to introduce water charges, and that capital plan was implemented. Like, there was, Phil Hogan at the time said we need 10 billion investment in water. There has been 10 billion of investment in capital Irish water infrastructure over the past 11 years. So, like, there are two different political questions. One is, do we decide to invest in our water infrastructure? With a government that's saying kind of money is no object when it comes to, for example, increasing military spending. We're going to go from $1 billion a year to $3 billion a year. So there's a political choice there about investing enough in our water infrastructure. And there's a second political choice and debate to be had about how do we raise that revenue to pay for that? Do we raise that in a regressive, unjust fashion, which is what water charges are, or do we use the Apple tax money or increase income tax on high earners or corporation tax? In other words, raise it in a progressive way that hits the highest earners and the wealthiest most, as opposed to ordinary people.